this Torah portion, which really talks about the tabernacle and this portable sanctuary. And we're going to get into that, of course, today, but this idea of what does it mean to create a space of holiness, of safety. So much of that safety has been lost for the people of Ukraine over the course of this year. And so definitely prayers to all those people there. Also, tomorrow, as you may have heard, is supposed to be this National Day of Hate from these neo-Nazi groups around the country. For those who haven't heard, of course, we had those 2 shootings in Pico Robertson 2 weeks ago. Again, the fact that we continue to deal with these things in our own neighborhoods. But I was just with the 5th and 6th graders here at Browerman East, and we were talking about Purim, and I was sharing with them again the story of Haman and how Haman approaches the king and says, you need to get rid of these Jews, not just because Mordecai doesn't bow down to him. And by the way, he doesn't just take out his anger on Mordecai, he decides to take it out on the entire Jewish people. And he says it's really because the Jews are different from the rest of us. They have a different set of laws. They don't abide by your laws, right? A lot of the anti-Semitic trope that we still find today in this idea that we are different, that we are power hungry, all of the tropes that exist are so built into the holiday that's coming up in just a couple of weeks, this holiday of Purim, and of course are still resonant for so many clearly in today's world, because we have a day of hate tomorrow by these neo-Nazi groups that are going to occur around the country. What's been put out by organizations is that it's not clear exactly what it's going to look like, but of course not to engage with people if you do happen to come across signs or people gathered together. Hopefully we won't have to deal with it in our own neighborhoods here in Los Angeles or wherever you may be. But there's already a lot of press about warnings about this. So again, the challenges that we have faced for thousands of years continue to bear their ugly head, and we just have to continue to be vigilant and not only to support one another, but to really help raise awareness amongst people who are not Jewish about who we are, what we represent, our value system. There was one statistic, I don't remember where I saw it recently, and you probably have heard of this too. 60% or between 40 and 60% of people under a certain age in this country have never learned about the Holocaust, don't know what the Holocaust is. Just some scary statistics out there that we have a responsibility to fight against. So with that, I want us to move into this week's Torah portion, which is a more hopeful Torah portion than some of these other things that we are dealing with in our world today. Really a beautifully hopeful Torah portion. If you remember where we are, we've received the 10 Commandments. We're at the base of Mount Sinai. This Torah portion is kind of mashed between the 10 Commandments and all of the laws that we found in Mishpatim. And then, of course, what's coming up, which is the story of the golden calf coming up soon. And the rabbis actually wonder why, you would think that actually chronologically, the Torah would have gone from, we get the 10 Commandments, Moses comes down from the mountain and finds the golden calf. Chronologically, it would make sense that the golden calf would take place in this Torah portion. Instead, it's a little later. So the rabbis ask, why is that? And they believe that, again, number one, we have to remember that the Torah is not supposed to be a historical document. It's really supposed to be a theological document that's teaching us lessons and values. So it's not supposed to necessarily just walk us historically through everything. And that we are supposed to be thinking about this tabernacle when we read the story of the golden calf, that there's the optimism and hope that comes with the building of the tabernacle here and through the rest of the book of Exodus is a reminder of a response to the golden calf-like moments in the world and in our lives. Okay, so we're going to focus today on the golden calf. Not on the golden calf, on this Torah portion and this idea of the tabernacle. And I will actually, let me stop my screen. I will put it in the chat for all of you so you have access to it on your own. And then you can, as is always the case with me, I never get to all the things that I have on my source sheet. So you can spend some time during Shabbat going over it together or on your own and studying it some more. Now we'll get to it. Okay, first, the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Torah portion begins with this. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." This is a very famous line, Va'asuli mikdash v'shochati b'tocham. Right? This is actually found in our liberal prayer book. It is the line that you find actually on the first page of our prayer book. So if you ever go to synagogue for Friday night services or Saturday, if you open up the title page, there's a quote right there. And there are some places in some sanctuaries where you find this on the doors of the sanctuary itself. So two interesting things here. One, I did not highlight. I didn't highlight them in the English, but you shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved, and then let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Okay, my first question is, why would it specifically talk about may they bring gifts from those who want to bring gifts from their heart? Why not just say those who want to bring gifts, let them bring gifts? Why? Any ideas or any background? I'm sure some of you have already studied this before. What is the significance of saying you shall bring gifts from your heart? Gary?
Not everyone has the capacity to give a monetary gift or a stone or whatever, but they're still dedicated to giving.
Okay, great. So that it opens the door for a variety of gifts to be given. It's not just a monetary, it's not just something that is on paper valuable, but it opens the door for anyone to be able to give a gift of something that they find valuable. Great. Donna, you want to add to that?
Am I okay? Yeah, I think it's what matter of the heart, your intention. No, I mean, God can make a way where you can give 20 million or you can give $5. God makes a way for everything, but it's a matter of why you want to do what you're doing and the intention behind it. And everyone, God looks at the heart, and I think he was right about what he said. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, great. So yes, so to give from the heart is different than just giving a gift, right? When I talk to B'nai Mitzvah students, I compare what's the difference between when you give your friend an Amazon gift card for their bar bat mitzvah as a gift or write a check versus when you make something that is unique and special to who they are, to your relationship with them. They are both gifts, but one is probably is from the heart, and one is a gift that is still significant and important, but not necessarily from the heart per se, right? So not only does this passage seem to suggest that we have a responsibility to give to this sanctuary of whatever we are able to give, not just the rich, right? But anything that you can give, but also more importantly is the intentionality, which of course is so important in our tradition, this idea of intentionality, of kavanah. When we think about prayers, we've talked about before, the two ideas of a prayer experience in our tradition are keva and kavanah. There's the structure to the prayer service. We always do Baruch Hu before we do Shema. We always do before Ve'ahavta, which comes before Mincha Mocha, right? There's an order. There's a set order to how we do things. But behind that order, you can't have just the order without the intentionality behind it, the kavanah, what you bring to that prayer. And so here, God seems to be suggesting, and the Torah seems to be reminding us that when you think about the gifts that you bring to the world, again, not to only think about the physical gifts that we give to others. What are your gifts? What are your true gifts internally in who you are? And what does it mean to bring those to the world with your heart or from your heart? And the only way that the tabernacle, this sanctuary, this portable sanctuary that the Jews are going to take with them as they wander through the desert, the only kinds of gifts that God really wants to be brought are gifts that come from the heart. So it gives people both the option of opting out. If they can't give a gift from their heart, okay, they don't need to participate. It also means that anything that is going to be used to build that portable sanctuary anytime that someone is in contact with that, you can imagine they feel a special connection, right? Because everyone is participating in building this sanctuary that will go with them. Any other comments or questions about this?
May I ask you a question about the 40 years?
Yes.
40 years in the desert, because it's been 40 years since Moshe died when we got together. 31 years he's gone. So 40 years is significant in the Torah, right, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting married.
All right. All right. Douglas.
Well, everybody is supposed to give, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to give from their heart, and there's going to be other ones who are going to be kind of reluctant, but they might want to do it just so they look good to their neighbors. There's a lot of peer pressure involved in this.
Great. So you're suggesting that probably still existed, that you feel like there's still this undertone of the peer pressure that can exist for giving, right? Yeah, and if you think about giving campaigns that exist even today, when people's names aren't listed, different tiers of giving, right? There are two ways in which people respond to that. Some see it as this is a really nice way to honor people who are participating in giving and they deserve to be honored for their gifts. And others see it as, well, this is pressure that's being put on the rest of us to have to fit into certain categories, or is a way of subliminally pressuring others to give at the same level as their friends, right? So there are different ways of reading that, even in today's world. But here it seems to be suggested that gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved, and that as a result of all of these different things, which of course were valuable things that people had to bring with them, that make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So now we're going to look at some interpretations, because of course the rabbi's first question is, why does God need a sanctuary to dwell among them when God is everywhere? Because that's what we teach all of our young children, that God is all around us, that God is not, of course, as we learned a couple of weeks ago from the 10 Commandments, it's not, we do not bow down to idols. We don't worship idols. So why the heck does God need a sanctuary when God is everywhere? So a few different interpretations. First, know, my child, that any commandment that God requires of humankind comes only out of God's desire to benefit us. God's command to build the tabernacle for us to offer therein our prayers and sacrifices comes not out of God's needs to dwell in an earthly dwelling among humankind, but rather out of God's awareness that we need to train our own selves. Okay, so this is one idea. The idea that, of course, God doesn't need any earthly dwelling place. God is everywhere. That God is trying to teach us a lesson. That this is really supposed to help benefit us. That the tabernacle is, again, the challenge that we face as Jews with our understanding of God is that there is no real image of God, which, unlike other traditions, makes it more difficult for us, because we can't imagine a person that can represent God. And so to live in this physical world, we need reminders of how to be connected to God. And so the tabernacle was God's way of saying to us, okay, you need something to ground your sense of connection to me. And the tabernacle is going to be that grounded sense, right? So we've used the temple in Jerusalem, of course, the tabernacle. We use our prayer books, if you think about it. There are ways that we always try and ground ourselves with our tradition. And this, according to this interpretation, the tabernacle is a way in which we can ground our connection to God. Okay, we'll do a couple and then I'll take any thoughts. Then Kazuto says, in order to understand the significance and purpose of the tabernacle, we must realize that the children of Israel, after they had been privileged to witness the revelation of God at Mount Sinai, were about to journey from there and thus draw away from the site of the theophany. So as long as they were encamped in the place, they were conscious of God's nearness. But once they set out on their journey, it seemed to them as though the link had been broken, unless there were in their midst a tangible symbol of God's presence among them. It was the function of the tabernacle, literally dwelling, to serve as such a symbol. Not without reason, therefore, does this section come immediately after the section that describes the making of the covenant at Mount Sinai. The nexus between Israel and the tabernacle is a perpetual extension of the bond that was forged at Sinai between the people and their God. The children of Israel, dwelling in tribal order at every encampment, are able to see from every side the tabernacle standing in the midst of the camp, and the visible presence of the sanctuary proves to them that just as the glory of God dwelt on Mount Sinai, so too God dwells in their midst wherever they wander in the wilderness. This is the purpose of Scripture when it states, "And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." Okay, so this is slightly connected to the one above, but this seems to be the tabernacle is, again, a physical reminder, but here seems to be this idea, the physical reminder of Mount Sinai itself. To imagine that the tabernacle, the dwelling place, if we want to think about our sanctuary, if we want to think about any sanctuary that exists, is supposed to be a reminder of what happened at Mount Sinai and this covenantal relationship, this revelatory moment at Mount Sinai, where the Jews built a relationship with God that went beyond this idea of God just freeing us from slavery. What happened at Mount Sinai is the codification of this special relationship. And from this point forward, in order to remind us in those moments where we are faced either personally or collectively by those moments where we feel so distant from God, this tabernacle, especially as they were wandering through the desert, as we are supposed to really think about imagining ourselves as wandering through the desert regularly, as we're wandering, we have this symbol to remind us of that special relationship and that God is with us at all times. And finally, one more, and then I'll open it up. Any thoughts or comments? Each one of us needs to build God a tabernacle in the recesses of our hearts by preparing oneself to become a sanctuary for God and a place for the dwelling of God's glory. Okay, so this one takes it and personalizes this idea of tabernacle for every single person. That what we need to do is within each one of us, we need to build a tabernacle. That we have a responsibility within our own hearts to create ourselves as a sanctuary for God. So it's not just an outside thing, that this physical reminder, but what is that the deeper purpose is to imagine that we ourselves become a sanctuary for God, and we have to work to build that into our entire core being. Thoughts on any of those three commentaries, or anything else about this idea of either from the heart or this idea of God saying, build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them? Yes, Rebecca.
What you're saying makes so much sense. So thank you very much, because I know that for myself, when I finally went back into the sanctuary after having done so many Zooms, it was a really special feeling. And I can say that not just for synagogues, but when I go to any type of holy place, church, wherever, I get that same feeling.
Great. Yeah, there is something magnificent. Obviously, our sanctuary is unique in its magnificence. But churches, of course, have taken this idea of the tabernacle and building out spaces in a way that Jews did not feel comfortable doing, except for, Rabbi Magnin here and a few places in Europe. But really, that these are supposed to be places that connect us. When you walk into the sanctuary, I was just telling someone yesterday, I love when I'm on the bima and I'm leading either a Friday night or a bar bat mitzvah, and guests to the community come and they walk in, and I get to see their faces as they look at the magnificence of our sanctuary for the first time. And I wish I could just take pictures and we could have a photo album of everyone's awe-inspired looks when they come into our sanctuary, right? But the whole idea is that this idea of feeling a part of something bigger, that there is an awesomeness. And the tabernacle, of course, was very small. It was portable because they had to schlep it around through the desert, but it was made in such intricate detail with such important and valuable materials that it was to be as inspiring as our sanctuary can be. And so when we enter those spaces, you're right, we can feel settled, we can feel connected, we can feel as though there is something magnificent happening around us. Gary.
So going back a few years when the camp was still the camp, the Hilltop Chapel, where you could look through the ark, the glass in the ark, and look at the ocean and the sun setting behind the chapel. And that's not a tabernacle in the sense that we were inside a building or anything, but it was still one of the more spiritual places I've ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, as you mentioned, it's an outdoor tabernacle. Right? In the tabernacle itself, there were very few people who actually got entrance to the tabernacle. So it's almost as though, similar to that hilltop space, their own chapel there, right? It was really about, there is this connection to nature where the tabernacle existed, but everyone else mostly didn't get access to that tabernacle. They got to see it from the outside, and it was to be reminded in the awesomeness of the vast wilderness that there are these little points of beauty, and that you can create that we have our opportunity, not just in huge spaces like our sanctuary, but outside, really anywhere. Because if you think about it, we are not tied to any specific location. We do not create one space as holy. So a lot of people will say the Western Wall is holy. And yes, it is. But at the same time, there are Jews who literally, if you are there at the Western Wall, if you turn around from the Western Wall and you look up on the little hilltops there are yeshivas, there are people, ultra-Orthodox Jews, who are not walking down to the Western Wall in order to pray, even though they could. They're praying up in their own yeshivas. So those are just as holy as the Western Wall itself. So we actually have democratized holy space in the sense that it doesn't have to be in one location. It doesn't even have to be in a sanctuary in order for it to be a holy space. Donna?
I have a really important question. Don't you think it could bring world peace if a rabbi and a priest were in the Sistine Chapel with a huppah at a wedding?
Know. That would be an interesting thing.
I'm trying to bring
Not
everybody
sure.
together for Israel and love and peace and getting along, and like you said, Jewish and Catholic getting married. I mean, but we love the Lord. Okay, thank you for the answer.
Susan, do you have your hand up?
Well, this is not earth-shattering, but in all those places, what is needed, I mean, even if you don't have the tabernacle and if you're outdoors, is the ark. And I know Chabad and others that haven't had the wherewithal, they meet in storefronts, but they have the ark there. So that's not to put down the sanctuary, because we know psychologically that's exceedingly important, and that's what Christians did, for Europe, and see the amazing churches that were built, and even some mosques. But it's, for us, it's the 10 Commandments, and that's what must have been there when Gary was there in the Hilltop Chapel, and it certainly was in Campus Creamer Chapel. So,
yep, great, thank you, Susan. All right, let's get back to the text. So Martin Buber, famous philosopher, discovered a link between the story of creation and the building of the tabernacle. He's not the only one who discovered this, but he lays out 7 connections between the building of the tabernacle and creation. And I wanted to share it because I think it's nice to recognize, as we find in various parts of our tradition and throughout the Torah, parallels that we find within the stories, and the links that are connecting various stories within our tradition. So I just want to go through these. So the first example is places where we have in the beginning of creation, God made the expanse, God made the 2 great lights, God made the wild beasts. And then when it comes to the sanctuary, the tabernacle, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. They shall make an ark, they shall make a table, they shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The similar Hebrew, similar structure that we find in the making of these things in creation, and then the making of the tabernacle itself. Then we have 2 other examples here. For in 6 days, God made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the 7th day. Therefore, Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And we find when the building of the tabernacle, the presence of God abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid for 6 days. On the 7th day, God called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And that's the precursor to him building the tabernacle's commandments. The heaven and earth were finished in all their array. On the 7th day, God finished the work that had been undertaken. God ceased on the seventh day from doing any of the work. And then we see, thus was finished all the work of the tabernacle and the tent of meeting. Again, parallel language being used in the Hebrew here. So Moses finished the work. And then finally, and God saw all that had been made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day, and God blessed the seventh day. And then we find at the tabernacle, and Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had performed all the tasks as Adonai had commanded, so they had done. Moses blessed them. So we have these parallels between creation of the world and the creation of the tabernacle. And Nechama Leibowitz says, the Lord created heaven and earth and all therein for man to dwell in, and created them in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. Similarly, Moses was summoned on the seventh day to the cloud to see the pattern of the tabernacle that it was his duty to erect in order to provide a place on earth for the divine presence. It is incumbent on man to imitate his creator, his ways and attributes, and assume the role of being his partner in creation. Okay, so here what Nechama Leibowitz is pointing out is, yes, okay, it's nice to make a connection between various parts of the Torah, but what the deeper purpose of this connection and why, according to this interpretation, why these two use similar languages is because we are supposed to imitate our creator, that the real purpose of the tabernacle, different potentially from those passages we saw earlier, is that this is a reminder that we have a responsibility to try and be holy, as we find in Kedusha, in the Torah portion in Leviticus 19, where the holiness code, where we have this idea that we have a responsibility to try and be holy like God, and that we have to create a world just as God created the world out of love, out of hope. We have a responsibility to be building a world like that as well. And the building of the tabernacle is linked to the creation of the world as a reminder for us to really think about how we must create the world around us. Any responses to that? Agree with that, disagree, thoughts, or any other connections that you see that could be significant between the creation of the world and the creation of the tabernacle? Okay, we'll keep going.
Well, it would be
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
it would be a connection to Tikkun Olam, right?
Say more.
That's all I could come up with.
Okay.
To our responsibility, Tikkun Olam, right?
Yeah. Okay. So to repair the world. So, right. So just as God not only created the world, but then tells us to create this tabernacle, we have a responsibility to repair or to bring more beauty into the world and to repair some of the brokenness. Great. Susan?
So I'm a little confused with it too. Some of the things repeat. I mean, there are lights. The lamps repeat the lights in the firmament. The water repeats the seas and the expanse. And there's some parallels that are to be drawn. But this negates what I said before, as long as the 10 Commandments are there. This is actually a structural enterprise that is for which he's drawing parallels, which are fine, but then it's a stretch to say to repair the world or even to repair ourselves. I think, I mean, one has to extrapolate from that and just make the former a metaphor. So I find it a little, that extrapolation, anyway, a little tenuous here.
As is totally appropriate, right? Because some of these interpretations are significant stretches, and we resonate. You know, the reason I like to bring different interpretations that don't always align with one another is because the beauty of our tradition is that we may be drawn to one interpretation over another, and that depends on so many different factors. And that's the beauty of our tradition, is that we have all of these different ways of connecting. Eric?
But just if you're repairing something, that means it was broken and somebody broke it. So how does that work in?
To the building of the tabernacle itself?
No, the tikkun olam, to repair, to fix.
Well, that was Rebecca's interpretation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I were to try and take Rebecca's interpretation and try and develop that, I could say that since the world was created, it's been broken. It was continually broken down from the time God created it. And as soon as we had free will, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the world has become broken in its various forms. And that the tabernacle, if it is to mirror the creation story, is to mirror the hope and optimism that we can go back to a world that is built on beauty and love. And therefore, the tabernacle could serve as a reminder of our responsibility to repair and to return to a type of more idyllic worldview. And so that the tabernacle is the reminder of that. That would be my interpretation of Rebecca's interpretation. I don't know if Rebecca wants to add to that.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, Rabbi.
Benjamin.
Thank you, Rabbi. Just on a different tangent, this line, it is incumbent on man to imitate his creator. I think about, man being created in the image of God. And here is sort of another commandment related to that we, because we're in God's image, we should be like him.
Very nice. I love that. Great. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now moving on to a different piece, which comes where God says, they shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. The reason I highlighted they is because the rabbis say the rest of the time where it talks about what is to be created, if you look up here, you shall make a table, you shall make a lampstand. But up here where it came to the ark, it said they. So the rabbis are wondering, okay, well, why? Why are you saying they here? But when it comes to the various other components of the ark, it says you. There must be a reason, again, because everything according to our tradition has significance. So why is that? The change in the wording from the second person singular to the third person plural is to illustrate that the essence of the Torah can only be fulfilled by Israel as a whole. No single individual can perform all the precepts of the Torah, but taken as a whole, the Israelite people can keep the entire gamut of Jewish observances. For this reason, the Torah states, they shall make the ark. Okay, so I just thought that was a nice reminder that it goes back to the idea that it is not incumbent upon us to finish the task, but we can't desist from participating in fixing the world, right? And so that here is a reminder that it's not on us as individuals. Now, of course, they're probably thinking of it from more of a mitzvah and an obligation standpoint, that not every Jew can fulfill all the mitzvot. We shouldn't be burdened by the fact that we can't do everything that the Torah is asking to do. I don't think that's our liberal mindset of how we understand obligation. So the way I like to take this is more that in order for us to build this better world, we shouldn't feel as though the burden is on each of us completely on our own, that everyone together as a whole, if we were to actually coalesce as a community, God willing someday, that if the Jewish people were able to really as a whole come together, then we're going to be able to really fix this world and hold together the entire observance, the entire gamut as it suggests here. Donna.
I just coming together as a community as a whole, Israel and Jewish people to the world to be a light. That's why they did the Arabic scroll, the Torah scroll for the king of Saudi Arabia, and the rabbi was invited there to pray for peace. So we have to reach out to every group of people around the world and show love.
Great. Okay, good. So that's another nice interpretation, that it's not just Israel to support one another, but the Jewish people as a whole have a responsibility to bring the precepts of Torah, to teach our value system beyond, not as a way of proselytizing per se, right? But to help others, as we were mentioning at the start of this, about how tomorrow these neo-Nazis gathering around the country and all the anti-Semitism and hate that we've seen, that we have a responsibility also to bring Torah to the world and to help people recognize our value system and the beauty that comes with that. Okay, Moving on, we might actually get through this whole sheet today. That would be amazing. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Right, we already saw that. Overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding roundabout. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of its side walls, and 2 on the other side, 2 on the other. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be removed from it. And deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact which I will give you. Okay, so the tablets of the pact which are going to go in the ark are the 10 commandments. And what we have here is when they are making this ark, that it needs to be, be able to be carried. And so it has to have poles on it, and the poles need to remain in the rings of the ark, never to be removed. So the rabbis also wonder this: why do you need to have poles that are in rings if they're never supposed to be removed? Why would you do that? The poles of the ark symbolize, on the physical plane, the ubiquitous mission of the ark and what it housed, to be carried beyond its place to wherever circumstances demanded. The commandment, the poles shall not be removed, embodied the eternal message that the Torah is not parochial, restricted to the particular country where the temple is situated. Independence of place is an essential characteristic of the Torah. Okay, so I like this interpretation because it seems to be suggesting that what's important here is that the Torah, what is the ark, is symbolic of this idea that Torah is found everywhere, that you can't remove Torah from the world, that the Torah is not planted in one specific place, that Torah is actually independent of place, and that Torah should be found everywhere that we experience life. So it's going beyond don't just see that a Jewish place is at the synagogue. It's also seeming to suggest that on a deeper level than that, this concept of Torah is not supposed to be relegated in your life to only when you go to synagogue or where you celebrate a Jewish holiday. It's the idea that Torah is supposed to move fluidly throughout our entire existence in our identity. So it's not supposed to be necessarily just one piece of who we are. It is supposed to be immersed into our entire being, in that it's supposed to guide our values and how we live our lives, right? Which is, of course, the entire purpose of Torah. And the tabernacle is a way of seemingly bringing Torah with us wherever we go. So because the tabernacle is portable, it's not just in one place. We don't go to Mount Sinai, for example. Of all the holy places that we could imagine in the Torah, since the temple in Jerusalem is not a part of the Torah itself, I would think that Mount Sinai would be the most holy of the locations, right? If we think about what happened at Mount Sinai, we got the 10 commandments. Those of you who've been at Torah study the last couple of weeks saw the majesty of what happens when we receive the 10 commandments, the thunder and the lightning and the fire on the mountaintop and the world shaking and God speaking to the Jewish people, all at this one mountain where Moses ascends and gets the 10 commandments which have guided our people and much of secular society ever since. And yet we don't have pilgrimages to Mount Sinai. We don't go to Mount Sinai. There's actually nothing Jewish at Mount Sinai at all. There's, I think, a monastery at the base of Mount Sinai right now. And so we have taken this idea of holy locations and demoted them in a way that we do care about space as being holy. Here we have time. We already declared that time is very important because Shabbat was created on the 7th day. So we recognize that time is holy. We recognize that there's a value system that is supposed to guide us to try and be holy. That's what we received at Mount Sinai. We received those 10 commandments and all the other commandments in mitzvot to define a value system that can lead us to a more holy world. And now we finally have part 3, which is the space, a holy space. And yet, unlike other places or times where we would imagine that a holy space is grounded in one particular place, we have made it portable, and we take it wherever we go. And that's why why the Siddur, why the prayer book, for example, has become our art piece in the Jewish world, because we haven't been able to be grounded geographically because we've been kicked out of so many places. So what did we bring with us? We brought with us Torah, we brought with us our stories, and we created a prayer book that could go with us anywhere, as a way to take the physicality of holiness and make it portable. And everything that we've done is made a portable version of holiness so that we can go onto a mountaintop and pray to God, and it can have the same significance as when you're standing in our sanctuary. Other thoughts, questions, comments about any of this? Most of this Torah portion, besides what comes up next with Kitisa and the golden calf, and the disturbing thing that Moses does at the end of the story of the golden calf. Besides that, the rest of the book of Exodus is really about the building of the tabernacle, and then the priestly garments that the priests were supposed to wear. That's really the rest of this book. And then after we finish up with the book of Exodus, we leave the narrative arc of the Jewish journey in the desert, and we go into the book of Leviticus, which kind of just delves deeply into the priests. So we end with all the priestly garments at the end of the book of Exodus, and then we spend an entire book really focused on purity and holiness, vis-a-vis sacrifices that the priests would offer at this portable sanctuary. And then it's only after that little break in the book of Leviticus that we come back to the book of Numbers to continue the journey. And after the book of Numbers, of course, we're really at the end of the journey, because Deuteronomy is really just a retelling of everything that came before it. So we're I'd say almost 2/3 of the way done with our journey story. We still have 3 books of the Torah left, but when we think about the arc of the journey, now it kind of stalls out after next week, and after the golden calf kind of stalls in terms of movement until we get to the book of Numbers again. Any other comments about this idea of holy places or sanctuaries, or what does it mean for God to dwell among us? Does anyone feel as though there are either certain places, times, or experiences where you feel that God dwells among us? In other words, does this concept laid out in the Torah about how we create spaces where God can be with us, does that resonate with you? Or do you feel like that's an ancient way of thinking about it? In today's world, the way in which we commune with God is different.
Rabbi, I think music, when we're singing, it says, he inhabits the praises of his people. So when we're singing, I really feel God's presence.
Great. Okay.
Rabbi
So
says it's praying twice.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Singing is a
You're welcome.
wonderful way. Gary?
My wife of blessed memory would say that walking in the hills of Oakland for hours with her dog among the redwood trees, that was what she needed. That was spirituality. And a rabbi actually did a sermon and included that story in the High Holy Day sermon about finding spirituality outside of the synagogue.
Nice. And is it similar for you?
Yeah, to some extent, but not to that extent.
How are you defining spirituality, may I ask?
That's a good question. I think being at one with yourself, getting your thoughts and your, kind of going through your head, clearing your head out of thoughts and things like that. It's kind of like, for her, it was meditation, but she was walking while she was doing it. It was that kind of a thing.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, Benjamin. And then Ellen.
Well, I like I like that point Gary makes. I think I can relate where when I'm out, whether it's in the hills here in Southern California or the ocean, it is spiritual for me in that I'm reminded, these are all created by God, and there is a natural beauty to those places, and it does touch me. But I also think that I kind of tied to this idea of the ark being on the pole so you could carry it around. So a sense that we don't need these giant churches or what have you that maybe the Christians have built. I know we have our amazing sanctuary on Wilson Boulevard, but that we could have that spirituality and that connection with God anywhere.
Great. Thank you. Ellen?
Yes, I love nature, and nature to me is God. I'm a huge deadheader. I deadheaded Bristol Farms in the parking lot. Just, it makes me feel the beauty. It's there. My front walkway is full of freesias. That to me is God, because how did it get so beautiful? Anyway, thank you for today. It was a wonderful, wonderful service.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for sharing how you connect. Susan. And then Brad.
I think it's, I feel the same way about nature, but getting outside, it's an aha moment. But I never think God is in nature. That God created nature. And that's when I start feeling spirituality. God created that, you know, how awesome is this, God, that you created this space. So that's an individual thing. There are times too that I feel, you know, with Baruch Hashem, as the Chabadniks say, but being thankful for various moments. Geez, I missed that car missed hitting me, you know, and various things that to be grateful for, that had not, some that had nothing to do with my doing it, but it was a circumstance where felt that I was saved, or even at another time at bereavement. What might happen, you know, where's the soul going, and you know, and thinking about God in that respect. Now that's an individual thing, but there may be times they're talking about communal things, you know, and unfortunately the communal things which will never answer was where was God when the Holocaust. So, but there are other places where God was, you know, even speaking of the Holocaust, the reverse of that, it was the birth of Israel, which had taken centuries and millennia to happen. So it's a tougher thing, I think, for communal responses. Where was God in our community when these various things happened? But individually, I think spirit. I'm not Spinoza, and I thought Spinoza was totally wrong, you know, that God is nature, and I can't go there.
Okay.
Because nature doesn't have a moral requirement. God did the 10 Commandments in our tradition, and that has nothing to do with nature. It has to do with human conduct, civilization, and how one behaves. There's the moral nature to that. So not moral nature, there's a moral quality dimension.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for that perspective. And also, in addition to what you're saying, this idea of the communal versus personal, which I think is the challenge that we face, not just as a Jewish community, but in general, we've moved to a more individualized worldview. And the tabernacle, again, as we saw in the text, was surrounded on all sides by the Jewish community. And that there is a difference, you know, the reason we have minions and why there are certain prayers that are said in community is because there is a different way in which our tradition believes that we can access spirituality or God when we are in a group, as opposed to when we are alone. It can be different. It's not to say you can't when you connect on your own, but that there's also a different piece of accessing God that can occur in a communal setting. So thank you. Brad.
You know, I don't I don't relate spirituality to a place. To me, it's when we are active that we are most spiritual. We are a people of action where we're created in God's image, and God is a creator. When we create, that's when we're closest to God. And a creation, our act of creating is through action, not simply contemplation.
Great. So can you dig in a little bit more on what you mean by what it is that we're creating, or what kind of action?
Well, I mean, it's in our daily lives, our work. I mean, yes, it's secular, but the fact that we are creating something is when we are closest to God, as God is a creator. So it doesn't have to be relating to a religious action necessarily. We find spirituality in our daily lives by just being us and working and creating and doing things and making the world a better place. And I'm going on and on.
No, I love it.
And repeating myself.
No, thank you, Brad. Stacy.
Brad's comments just made me think of just showing up. Like just showing up, whatever that happens to, however that happens to manifest itself, can be a form of spirituality.
That's great.
Or maybe an interpretation of it. I'm not sure what the precise way to articulate it, but Brad's comment just made me think about that. Just sometimes showing up is sufficient.
Yes, our presence alone. So I just want to go back for us to end with I'll have to see where I put it. I don't remember where it was. No. One that I feel like some of you are keying in on. Each one of us needs to build God a tabernacle in the recesses of our hearts by preparing oneself to become a sanctuary for God and a place for dwelling of God's glory. Right? If we are creators, if we show up, what we are doing is we are building God and building tabernacles into the very core of who we are. And if every single person were to create a tabernacle of sorts within ourselves, we can help to bring the beauty of this world. We bring God into the world more with our actions, with this space that we create, with showing up. So I hope you can take this idea of the tabernacle, this idea of giving gifts from your heart, to really think about what are the gifts that you bring into the world? How can you more fully bring them with your whole heart into the world? And how is it that you are building sanctuaries, not just visiting sanctuaries, but how are you creating sanctuaries in your own lives and for our world around us? So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom.
Have a good, wonderful, restful Shabbat.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi. Shabbat
Bye,
shalom,
everybody.
everybody.
Shalom. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody. Love you.